Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and to our viewers. My name is Akundesh Kaluwajishimo, and my colleagues are Jane Wandila and Mauricio Sachio. Our research topic is the effects of village banking on women empowerment and entrepreneurship. Motivation of study. Our motivation of study is one, village banking has gained an increased popularity and is growing at a steady rate. Here in Zambia, as more people are creating self-help group as a way of providing financial support to one another. So we've seen that more people have learned about it and are in fact interested and have since been joining. The second one is village banking is mainly used by women, and there were the main focus of this study. According to Bank of Zambia, 67.9% of the females are financially excluded as compared to the 71.2% of the males. This is where village banking comes in, that it helps more women to be financially included, as we can see in the drastic difference between the females and the males. So Bank of Zambia has recognized that village banking is the first step to moving people from the informal to the formal financial inclusion. Thirdly, the aim of the study is to investigate the entrepreneurial journey of women entrepreneurs and empowerment. Key terms: village banking. Village banking is a group of self-selected individuals who save together and take out loans from the accumulated savings. They use these loans to invest in their businesses. Microfinance. Microfinance is the provision of savings account, loan insurance, money transfers, and other banking services to customers that lack access to the formal financial service. These institutions focus on making financial services available to everyone who is ignored or not included by the formal finance service providers. Entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship. This is an activity of setting up a business or businesses while taking on financial risk in hope of getting profits, and people who do this are called entrepreneurs. Women empowerment. It is a process of empowering women through promoting women's sense of self-worth and their ability to determine their own choices. Village banking empowers these women with the funds they get to invest in their businesses, so they become financially free and independent, where they gain a lot of confidence in their daily lives. And these monies also help them, not only them, but also their families and the community at large. Problem statements. So the main problem for people in underdeveloped countries like Zambia is not only a shortage in the capital resources, but also the limited access to the financial services. So Village Bank helps to bridge this gap in that they provide funds to these women, which is their capital, and they invest the funds in their businesses. This makes them acquire financial service. Secondly, village banking has a contradicting result, both positive and negative. The positive, such as tools for poverty reduction, affordable financial services, and the negative, such as increasing indebtedness. So the purpose of the study is that we want to see if village banking affects its members positively or negatively, and does it contribute to the current debate about the effects of village banking. Next, the knowledge gap that exists is that there has been no recent studies in this phenomenon, and the environment in which village banks operate have changed. So in our study, we found that recent studies were done on these from 3 years ago, back in 2018 and 2017, and the environment in which these village banks are operating are different. Things have changed. For example, we're now in a pandemic era. They have where things are done differently, and most of the previous studies have been carried out outside Kitwe, and our findings are different from the current information that's available. So the general objective of this study is to assess the effect that village banking has on women empowerment and entrepreneurship. The area study is Kitwe, Zambia. So study objectives. We have 4 study objectives. The first one, to boost economic activities through empowerment of women entrepreneurships, to increase capital empowerment of women entrepreneurs, to improve livelihood of women entrepreneurs, to to enhance self and group financial knowledge of women entrepreneurs. The consumption model. Our consumption model was adapted from the Joseph Ndawi, and here we look at the independent and the dependent variables. The dependent variables being the women empowerment and entrepreneurship, and the independent variables being the increase in capital, enhance self and group financial knowledge, boost economic activities, and livelihood. Hypothesis. Our hypothesis is based here in Kitwe, Zambia. So for the first hypothesis, the null hypothesis says there is no relationship between economic activities and women entrepreneurship, while the alternative hypothesis says there is. The second hypothesis states, the null hypothesis states that there is no relationship between an increase in capital empowerment and women entrepreneurship, while the alternative says there is. Thirdly, the null hypothesis states that there is no relationship between improvement in livelihood of women and women entrepreneurship, while the alternative hypothesis says there is. And last, null hypothesis states that there is no relationship between enhanced financial knowledge and women entrepreneurship, while the alternative hypothesis says there is. Underpinning theories. So we basically have two underpinning theories, the empowerment theory and the Grammy model theory. Literature review. So our literature review, this gives us a summary of studies done by other scholars here in Zambia and also in other countries in Africa and worldwide. Thank you for listening. I'll now call upon the next speaker.
Up from where my colleague left, I'll be running us through the research design all the way to the conclusion. The research design used in this survey was a descriptive survey design, and we thought this would be appropriate as it carries out a research subject without manipulation of the variables. The research approach we used was quantitative and qualitative approach, and the target population for this study was women entrepreneurs in Kitwe. These are housewives, marketeers, office workers, and any other woman. The sample size, we arrived at our required sample size by running the population of Kitwe, which is over 500,000, Railsoft, which then gave us the appropriate sample size of 324. Data collection was done through questionnaires, through online platforms. This data was then analyzed and interpreted using SPSS. Findings and interpretation. To measure the reliability of this data, the Crunchbatch Alpha was applied. And looking at the findings of our variables, we can say safely that this data is reliable as it is within the prescribed range of 0.25 to 0.7. Sample profile results. These are the demographic results of our research, and I'll be explaining the gender variable. We had a percentage turnout of male respondents of 8.5 and a percentage turnout of female respondents of 9.15. This is in line with our research as we were investigating how village banking affects women entrepreneurs, and the large female turnout makes sense as our results are in line with our research. Next, we have the correlation matrix. The correlation matrix measures not only how independent variables relate to the dependent variables, but also how the independent variables relate to each other. Looking at our table, we will start with how the independent variables relate to the dependent variable. Capital empowerment, which is an independent variable, relates to women empowerment and entrepreneurship, the dependent variable, by 0.60. Livelihood relates to women empowerment and entrepreneurship by 0.323. Financial knowledge relates to women empowerment and entrepreneurship by negative 0.110. Economic activities relate to women empowerment and entrepreneurship by 0.054. We can tell from this that three of our variables, which are capital empowerment, economic activities, and livelihood, that there is a positive relationship between the independent variables and the dependent variables. While with one of our variables, financial knowledge, there is a negative relationship between the dependent variable and independent variable. What this means is that the outcomes move in opposite directions. When we look at the inside of the correlation matrix and see how the independent variables relate to each other, for the sake of time, we'll only look at one, which is financial knowledge. We can see that financial knowledge relates to an increase in capital by 0.004, while financial knowledge relates to personal economics and livelihood by 0.00. Financial knowledge relates to financial knowledge itself by 1, and financial knowledge relates to economic activities by 0.45. What this means is that for all of our objectives, there is close to zero correlation between the variables. When the correlation is as low as that, we can safely say that the variables are independent of each other and will not affect the research or the regression results. This is also proven by the variables having a correlation figure of less than 0.7, which is the required standard. We can now move on to the regression analysis. We can now move on to the regression test. The regression test shows us a model summary of the results after the data has been processed. Looking at our results, we can see that R squared has a result of 0.127, which is 12.7%. This indicates that of our 4 independent variables, they only contribute 12.7% to the total variation of women empowerment and entrepreneurship, while 87.3% of the other factors that contribute to women empowerment and entrepreneurship have not been examined or accounted for in this study. This brings us to the hypothesis testing table. Looking at the hypothesis testing table, which is a diagrammatic representation of the now and alternative hypothesis, which my colleague had previously explained on. And for this testing table, we use a significance level of 0.05. Looking at H1 and H2, which are economic activities and capital empowerment, the now hypothesis states that there is no relationship of women empowerment and entrepreneurship to economic activities and capital empowerment here in Kitwe. The now hypothesis in this case has been accepted as the statistic significance of 0.632 for economic activities and 0.111 for capital empowerment are higher than the significance level of 0.05. Simply put, we are rejecting our alternative hypothesis. Next, we can look at H3 and H4, which are livelihood and financial knowledge. The now hypothesis of livelihood and financial knowledge, which states that there is no relationship to women empowerment and entrepreneurship, have been rejected. Simply put, we can say we can accept our alternative hypothesis, which states that there is a positive relationship between livelihood, financial knowledge, women empowerment, and entrepreneurship in Kitwe, Zambia. This is reflected in our table also when we look at the statistic significance of livelihood, which is 0.0, and financial knowledge, which is 0.03, and these two figures are below the significance level, which is 0.05. Significance of the study. This study will bring new information, both qualitative and quantitative, that researchers and academics will appreciate. As my colleague previously stated, the previous studies carried out in similar topics were carried out in 2017 and 2018, which was 3 to 2 years ago, and the environment in which we are now operating has changed. These studies were also carried out in Katete District, Kazungula District, eastern and western parts of Zambia, but none were carried out in Kitwe. We therefore believe we'll be bringing updated information about a new environment. This study is also significant as it will be appreciated by practitioners. Practitioners are people who engage in a discipline, and in this case we have the village banking members. This information will serve the village banking members as it will provide in-depth detail about what village banking entails, its benefits, and from this they can set up policies and procedures which will better benefit them. This study is also significant as this study will also be significant to policymakers as it will provide new information that can be used for creating policies and procedures to cater for an ever-changing environment. In this context, Bank of Zambia is the policymaker. Bank of Zambia has shown its support for village banking initiatives as they are the first step to formal financial inclusion, and with more information being made available, it can better protect its stakeholders and continue its support of village banking groups. One of the limitations faced in this research was a technological barrier. Because some participants were not conversant with using online platforms, this meant that even though participants were willing to take part in the survey, they were unable to do so. Another limitation that we faced was that this study was restricted to Kitwe only, which is a small town in comparison to the rest of Zambia. Therefore, findings may not be applicable to other parts of the country. This research was also carried out during a global pandemic. The spread of the novel coronavirus disrupted the way this research would have been carried out, which was through physical questionnaires and interviews. As previously stated, this research only accounted for 12.7% of the variations that affect women empowerment and entrepreneurship. We therefore recommend that future studies research on the 87.3% which were not examined in this study. We also recommend that this study be carried out annually so that practitioners and policymakers may have updated information. This study was carried out with the purpose of assessing the effect of village banking on women empowerment and entrepreneurship in Kitwe, Zambia. We therefore would like to encourage that village banking groups should be promoted as they provide women with more loans, business education, training and skill acquisition, economic empowerment, which would otherwise have not been acquired. We also suggest that policies should address efforts geared towards reducing the cost of borrowing, consultancy, and financial exclusion. Thank you so much for listening to our research. We hope that we have highlighted the importance that village banking plays in women empowerment and entrepreneurship.